I just want Hong Kong to stay Hong Kong. We are not demanding for something else or something extra.
Turning back to one of our top stories tonight, another massive pro-democracy demonstration in Hong Kong this weekend. Even conservative estimates put the turnout at more than 1 million people. For 11 weeks now, protesters have marched against Beijing's growing influence in Hong Kong's affairs, but not everyone in the city supports the movement. There have been pro-Beijing rallies as well, and many locals, including frustrated business owners, just want order restored. Even if I had to close my shop, I support the police, she says. Meanwhile, Beijing's presence is powerful and growing. Chinese troops have been running drills in neighboring Shenzhen for days now. So the stakes are clearly high for both the protesters and for Beijing. And just think how precarious it all is. One major incident, even a misunderstanding, could push things to a dangerous edge. So where do things go from here? Well, let's take a look at the situation from both sides. Joining me now, we have Andrea Chun, a lawyer and a media commentator. We also have Wenran Jiang, a China expert and professor at the University of British Columbia's School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. Thanks to both of you for being here. Andrea, I'll start with you, and let's talk about the crowd size, first of all, because by all accounts, I mean, the estimates are all over the map, but it was a large crowd. What does that tell you?
The huge crowd, well over 1 million, I'm positive of that, tells me that even though there's been so much talks of violent behavior in the last few weeks, public opinion is solidly behind these 5 demands, and protesters can actually go on the street and demonstrate that they want something peacefully, rationally, and without violence. So it tells me this is a critical point in turn of events in this whole movement.
Right, and perhaps that their momentum has continued.
Absolutely.
Given that this has gone on for so long. Wenran, I mean, what does that tell you? But also, I mean, if you could talk about the behavior of both sides, right? The behavior of the protests, that this unfolded relatively peacefully, but also the police response to it.
I think we have, last week, the violence play out sent a bad signal not only to Hong Kong people and also around the world. Both sides are reflecting. Not only, as Andrea said, protesters are more peaceful, constrained, but the police have reflected on themselves, maybe more of a less confrontational approach. Hong Kong police is highly trained. If things not out of hands, they should be able to handle that. At the same time, we also have Saturday big rally calling for unity. Some people call them pro-Chinese government. I think those are also Hong Kong ordinary people are coming to say one message: don't get out of hands and protest peacefully.
But what would you say then is China, mainland China's long-term strategy? I mean, I can't imagine that they would be content to have this situation unfold for even longer than it has already.
I think so far the Chinese central government has shown some constraints. They're not saying they're not prepared for any further violence. They're showing a force by the border city of Shenzhen, anti-police gears, anti-riot gears and all that. But at the same time, I don't think they're ready to just rule in the troops. That's very unwise. I'm pretty sure things are not out of control, especially in this weekend's demonstration showed there's no excuse for the Chinese government to do anything other than wait it out. So therefore, the long-term strategy, I think for them, is probably just to wait and see.
Right. So then, Andrea, I think it raises the question, who is exerting more pressure on whom?
I don't agree with everything that Professor Jiang has said, because I think China has come out, their spokesman has used the word like terrorism or revolution, et cetera. But I think the protesters have successfully not be violent today, and therefore there's no excuse or grounds for China to move in. And that's very, very important in this demand for all the 5 demands of the protesters.
Sure, but what is the protesters' end game here? Because, I mean, you mentioned the 5 demands,
right?
But we've seen protests like this, and not just Chinese or Hong Kong protests, but we've seen protests all around the world that have fizzled out, that have fallen short of the goal. And so is it realistic to think that they can force change?
Whether it's realistic or not, I think Hong Kong people are determined this time to keep on fighting. Whether the end will be achieved soon, as some would say, it might take months, if not years. Now, there's also talk that China would like this quelled by October 1st, which is the 70th anniversary of the birth of modern regime.
Right.
Now, having said all of that, I think right now we're at a very critical juncture because the protests have turned peaceful. So now, the ball is in whose court? What are they going to do? I think this might continue, and therefore China has a couple of choices. Opinions did not turn. If protests do not turn violent, there's no reason to use excessive force or even come in. Therefore, are they really going to back down? The easiest demand to give in would be to institutionalize a public inquiry. The second might be to sacrifice Carrie Lam, the chief executive. Now, if both sides don't blink, I don't think the situation is going to resolve on its own or fizzle out. I just don't see that with over 1 million people out. I just don't see that.
Wenran, I'll give you the last word, and the question is, how does this end? The likeliest outcome in your mind?
Well, the likely end for the mainland side, I see as long as no violent escalation is better. I think for Hong Kong protesters, the more important question is, what is the end game here? How do you achieve the goals you want to achieve without triggering a violent crackdown, potentially, by either Hong Kong authorities or the Chinese state? I think that is a very tricky question. I do not see the routes forward should be something like 30 years ago in Tiananmen. This should be more played out by civil society, dialogue, and peaceful protest. And I think China should compromise in some ways to cave into the demand of the civil society in Hong Kong. And that, I think, is good for keeping the one country, two systems so far has worked and make it continue to work.
Okay, well, we have some divergent opinions here, but fascinating and insightful ones as well. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.